Chapter 6. On Thursday, the Daily Fluxion published Quilliran's first profile of an artist. His subject was Uncle Waldo, the elderly primitive and portrayer of livestock. Quilliran had carefully avoided comment on the old man's artistic talent, building his story instead around the butcher's personal philosophy after a lifetime of selling chuck roasts to housewives in a lower middle-class neighborhood. The appearance of the story revived interest in Uncle Waldo's pictures, and on Friday, the unimportant gallery that handled his work sold all their dusty canvases of beef cattle and woolly lambs and urged the old man to resume painting. Readers wrote to the editor commending Quilliran's handling of the story, and Uncle Waldo's grandson, the truck driver, went to the offices of the Daily Fluxion with a gift for Quilliran: 10 pounds of homemade sausage that the retired butcher had made in his basement. Friday evening, Quilliran himself was accorded some attention at the press club as he distributed links of knackwurst. He met Arch Riker and Odd Bunsen at the bar and ordered his usual tomato juice. Arch said, "You must be quite a connoisseur of that stuff." Quilliran ran the glass under his nose and considered the bouquet thoughtfully. "An unpretentious vintage," he said. "Nothing memorable, but it has a naive charm. Unfortunately, the bouquet is masked by the smoke from Mr. Bunsen's cigar. I would guess the tomatoes came from—" He took a sip and rolled it on his tongue. "From northern Illinois. Obviously a tomato patch near an irrigation ditch, getting the morning sun from the east and the afternoon sun from the west." He took another swallow. "My palate tells me the tomatoes were picked early in the day, on a Tuesday or Wednesday, by a farmhand wearing a band-aid. The mercurochrome comes through in the aftertaste." "You're in a good mood," said Arch. "Yep," said Quilliran. "I'm moving out of the plastic palace. I'm going to rent an apartment from Mount Clemens." Arch set his glass down with a thud of astonishment, and Odd Bunsen choked on cigar smoke. "A furnished apartment on the first floor, very comfortable, and the rent is only $50 a month." "50! What's the catch?" said Odd. "No catch. He just doesn't want the house standing empty when he's out of town." "There's gotta be a catch," Odd insisted. "Old Monty's too tight-fisted to give anything away. Sure he doesn't expect you to be a cat-sitter when he's out of town?" "Quit being a cynical press photographer," said Quilliran. "Don't you know it's an outdated stereotype?" Arch said, "Odd's right. When our messenger goes to pick up the tapes, Mount Clemens sends him on all kinds of personal errands and never gives the kid a tip. Is it true he's got a house full of valuable art?" Quilliran took a slow swallow of tomato juice. "He's got a lot of junk lying around, but who knows if it's worth anything." He refrained from mentioning the Van Gogh. "The big attraction is the cat. He's got a Chinese name, something like Coco. Mount Clemens says cats like to hear a repetition of syllables when they're being addressed, and their ears are particularly receptive to palatal and valeric sounds." "Somebody's nuts," said Odd. "This cat is a Siamese, and he's got a voice like an ambulance siren. Know anything about the Siamese? It's a breed of super cat, very intelligent. This one can read." "Read?" "He reads newspaper headlines, but they have to be fresh off the press." "What does this super cat think of my photographs?" Odd said. "It's questionable whether cats can recognize pictorial images, according to Mount Clemens. But he thinks a cat can sense the content of a picture. Coco prefers modern art to old masters. My theory is that the fresher paint gets through to his sense of smell. Same way with fresh ink on a newspaper." "What's the house like?" Arch asked. "Old, declining neighborhood, but Mount Clemens cherishes his place like a holy relic. They're tearing down buildings all around him, but he says he won't give up his house. It's quite a place. Chandeliers, elaborate woodwork, high ceilings, all carved plaster." "Dust catchers," said Odd. "Mount Clemens lives upstairs, and the downstairs is made into 2 apartments. I'm taking the front one. The rear is vacant too. It's a nice quiet place, except when the cat lets out a shriek. How was the food on Wednesday night? When you taste Mount Clemens' cooking, you forgive him for talking like a character in a Noel Coward play. I don't see how he turns out such dishes with his handicap. You mean his hand? Yes. What's wrong with it? That's an artificial hand he wears, said Arch. No kidding. It looks real, except for a little stiffness. That's why he tapes his column. He doesn't type. Quillerin thought about it for a few moments. Then he said, I feel sorry for Mount Clemens in a way. He lives like a hermit. He thinks a critic shouldn't mix with artists, and yet art is his chief interest. That and the preservation of an old house. What did he say about the local art situation? Arch asked. It's a funny thing. He didn't say much about art. We talked mostly about cats. See? What did I tell you? Said Odd. Monty's lining you up for part-time cat sitting, and don't expect a tip. The unseasonable weather, warm for February, ended that week. The temperature plunged, and Quillerin bought a heavy pepper and salt tweed overcoat with his first full salary check. For most of the weekend, he stayed home, enjoying his new apartment. It had a living room with bed alcove, a kitchenette, and what Mount Clemens would call ambiance. Quillerin called it lots of junk. Still, he liked the effect. It was homey, and the chairs were comfortable, and there were gas logs in the fireplace. The picture over the mantel, according to the landlord, was one of Monet's less successful works. Quillerin's only complaint was the dim lighting. Light bulbs of low wattage seemed to be one of Mount Clemens' economies. Quillerin went shopping on Saturday morning and picked up some 75s and 100s. He had a book from the library on how to understand modern art, and on Saturday afternoon he was coping with Dadaism in Chapter 9 and chewing on a pipeful of unlighted tobacco when an imperative wail sounded outside his door. Although it was clearly the voice of a Siamese cat, the cry was divided into syllables with well-placed emphasis, as if the command were, "Let me in!" Quillerin found himself obeying the order punctually. He opened the door, and there stood Kauko Kung. For the first time, Quillerin saw the critic's cat in bright daylight. It streamed through the beveled glass windows of the hall. The light emphasized the luster of the pale fur, the richness of the dark brown face and ears, the uncanny blue of the eyes. Long brown legs, straight and slender, were deflected at the ends to make dainty feet, and the bold whiskers glinted with the prismatic colors of the rainbow. The angle of his ears, which he wore like a crown, accounted for his regal demeanor. Kauko Kung was no ordinary cat, and Quillerin hardly knew how to address him. Sahib? Your Highness? On impulse, he decided to treat the cat as an equal. So he merely said, "Won't you come in?" and stood aside, unaware that he was making a slight bow. Kauko Kung advanced to the threshold and surveyed the apartment carefully before accepting the invitation. This took some time. Then he stalked haughtily across the red carpet and made a routine inspection of the fireplace, the ashtray, the remains of some cheese and crackers on the table, Quillerin's corduroy coat hanging on the back of a chair, the book on modern art, and an unidentified and almost invisible spot on the carpet. Finally satisfied with everything, he selected a place in the middle of the floor, at a carefully computed distance from the gas fire, and stretched out in a leonine pose. "Can I get you something?" Quillerin inquired. The cat made no reply, but looked at his host with a squeezing of the eyes that seemed to denote contentment. "Coco, you're a very fine fellow," said Quillerin. "Make yourself comfortable. Do you mind if I finish my reading?" Cao Ko Kung stayed half an hour, and Quillerin relished the picture they made: a man, a pipe, a book, an expensive-looking cat. And he was disappointed when his guest arose, stretched, uttered a sharp adieu, and went upstairs to his own apartment. Quillerin spent the rest of the weekend anticipating his Monday lunch date with Sandra Halape. He was circumventing the problem of interviewing her husband by writing a profile of Cal Halape through the eyes of his family and friends. Sandy was going to steer him to the right people, and she had promised to bring candid snapshots of her husband teaching the children to ski, feeding turkeys on the Oregon farm, and training a Kerry Blue to sit up. All day Sunday, Quillerin felt that his mustache was transmitting messages to him. Or perhaps it merely needed clipping. Just the same, its owner sensed that the coming week would be significant. Whether significantly good or significantly bad, the informed source did not reveal. Monday morning arrived, and with it came an unexpected communication from upstairs. Quillerin was dressing and selecting a tie that Sandy might approve, a navy and green wool tartan made in Scotland, when he first noticed the folded paper on the floor, half pushed under the door. He picked it up. The handwriting was poor, like a child's scrawl, and the message was terse and abbreviated. Mr. Q, please Dell tapes to AR. Save mess a trip. GBM. Quillerin had not seen his landlord since Friday evening. At that time, he had moved his 2 suitcases from the hotel to the apartment and had paid a month's rent. A vague hope that Mount Clemens would invite him to Sunday breakfast, perhaps eggs Benedict or a chicken liver omelet, had evaporated. It appeared that only the cat was going to be sociable. After deciphering the note, Quillerin opened the door and found the reels of tape waiting for him on the hall floor. He delivered them to Arch Riker, but he thought the request strange and unnecessary. The dispatch room at the Fluxion had a bench full of messengers who sat around pitching pennies most of the time. Arch said, "Making any headway with the Halape profile?" "I am taking Mrs. Halape to lunch today. Will the Flux be willing to pick up the check?" "Sure, they'll go for a couple of bucks." "Where's a good place to take her? Somewhere special?" "Why don't you ask the hungry photographers? They're always getting people to buy lunch on expense accounts." In the photo lab, Quillerin found 6 pairs of feet propped on desks, tables, wastebaskets, and filing cabinets, waiting for assignments, or waiting for prints to come off the dryer, or waiting for the darkroom buzzer. Quillerin said, "Where's a good place to take someone to lunch for an interview?" "Who's paying?" "The Flux." "Sitting Bull's Chop House," the photographers said in unison. "The chopped sirloin weighs a pound," said one. "The cheesecake's 4 inches thick. They have a double lamb chop as big as my shoe." It sounded good to Quillerin. Sitting Bull's Chop House was located in the packing house district, and a characteristic odor seeped into the dining room to compete with the cigar smoke. "Oh, what a fun place!" Sandy Halape squealed. "How clever of you to bring me here! So many men! I adore men!" The men adored Sandy, too. Her red hat, topped with a proud black rooster tail, was the center of attention. She ordered oysters, which the chop house could not supply, so she contented herself with champagne. But with each sip, her laughter grew more shrill, rebounding from the antiseptic white tile walls of the restaurant, and the enthusiasm of her audience dwindled. "Jim, dear, you must fly down to the Caribbean with me when Cal goes to Europe next week. I'll have the plane all to myself. Wouldn't it be fun?" But she had forgotten to bring the information Quillerin needed, and the snapshots of her husband were unusable. The lamb chop was indeed as big as a photographer's shoe, and as flavorful. The waitresses, uniformed like registered nurses, were more efficient than cordial. The luncheon was not a success. Back in the office that afternoon, Quillerin had to listen to telephone complaints about Mount Clemens's review in Sunday's paper. The critic had called a watercolorist a frustrated interior decorator, and the watercolorist's friends and relatives were calling to castigate the Daily Fluxion and cancel their subscriptions. Altogether, Monday was not a halcyon day for Quillerin. At the end of the tedious afternoon, he fled to the press club for dinner, and Bruno, setting up a tomato juice, said, "I hear you've moved in with Mount Clemens." "I've rented one of his vacant apartments," Quillerin snapped. "Anything wrong with that?" "Not until he starts pushing you around, I guess." Then Odd Bunsen stopped long enough to give the newsman an informed grin and say, "I hear old Monty's got you running errands for him already." When Quillerin returned home to 26 Blenheim Place, he was in no mood for what he found. There was another note under his door. "Mr. Q," it read, "Appreciate pickup plane ticket. Reserve Wednesday, 3 p.m., New York. Charge my account. GBM." Quillerin's mustache bristled. It was true that the airline office was across the street from the Daily Fluxion building, and picking up a plane ticket was a small favor for his landlord to ask in return for a good dinner. What irked him was the abruptness of the request. Or was it an order? Did Mount Clemens think he was Quillerin's boss? Tomorrow was Tuesday. The plane reservation was for Wednesday. There was no time to make an issue of it, so Quillerin grumbled to himself and picked up the ticket the following morning on his way to work. Later in the day, Odd Bunsen met him on the elevator and said, "Going away somewhere?" "No." "Why?" "Saw you going into the airline office. Thought you were skipping town." He added a taunting grin. "Don't tell me you're running errands for Monty again." Quillerin groomed his mustache with his knuckles and tried to reflect calmly that curiosity and a keen sense of observation make a good news photographer. When he arrived home that evening, the third note was waiting under his door. It was more to his liking. "Mr. Q, please breakfast with me Wednesday, 8:30. GBM." Wednesday morning, Quillerin went upstairs with the plane ticket and knocked on Mount Clemens's door. "Good morning, Mr. Quillerin," said the critic, extending a thin white hand, his left. "I hope you are not in a hurry. I have a ramekin of eggs with herbs and sour cream, ready to put in the oven, if you can wait, and some chicken livers and bacon and brochette." "For that, I can wait," said Quillerin. "The table is set in the kitchen, and we can have a compote of fresh pineapple while we keep an eye on the broiler. I was fortunate enough to find a female pineapple at the market." The critic was wearing silk trousers and a short oriental coat, tied with a sash around his remarkably thin midriff. There was a scent of lime peel. His thong sandals slapped as he led the way down a long hall to the kitchen. The walls of the corridor were completely covered with tapestries, scrolls, and framed pictures. Quillerin remarked about the quantity. "Also quality," said Mount Clemens, tapping a group of drawings as he walked past them. "Rembrandt, Holbein, very fine. Millet." The kitchen was large, with 3 tall, narrow windows. Bamboo blinds kept the light subdued, but Quillerin peered through them and saw an exterior stairway, evidently a fire escape, leading down to a brick-walled patio. In the alley beyond the high wall, he could see the top of a station wagon. "Is that your car?" he asked. "That grotesquerie," said Mount Clemens with an implied shudder, "belongs to the junk dealer across the alley. If I kept a car, It would have some velocity of design, a Carmen Gia or a Citroën. As it is, I dissipate my fortune in taxicabs. The kitchen had a mellow clutter of antiques, copper utensils, and clumps of dried vegetation. I dry my own herbs, Mount Clemens explained. Do you appreciate a little mint marinated with the pineapple? I think it gives the fruit another dimension. Pineapple can be a little too direct. I grow the mint in a pot on the windowsill, chiefly for cow cocoon. His idea of a choice plaything is a bouquet of dried mint leaves tied in the toe of a sock. In a moment of rare wit, we have named his toy Minty Mouse. A rather free abstraction of a mouse, but that is the sort of thing that appeals to his artistic intellect. Mount Clemens was putting individual baking dishes into the oven one at a time, using his left hand. Where is Coco this morning? Quillerin asked. You should be able to feel his gaze. He is watching you from the top of the refrigerator, the only down-cushioned refrigerator west of the Hudson River. It is his bed. He refuses to sleep anywhere else. The aroma of bacon, herbs, and coffee was beginning to swirl about the kitchen, and Coco, on a blue cushion that matched his eyes, raised his nose to sniff. So did Quillerin. He said, What do you do about the cat when you go to New York? Ah, that is the problem, said the critic. He requires a certain amount of attention. Would it be an imposition if I asked you to prepare his meals while I am away? I'll be gone less than a week. He takes only 2 meals a day, and his diet is simple. There is raw beef in the refrigerator. You merely carve it in small pieces the size of a lima bean, put it in a pan with a little broth, and warm it gently. A dash of salt and a sprinkling of sage or thyme will be appreciated. Well, said Quillerin, spooning up the last of the minted pineapple juice. To make it easier for you in the mornings, when you are headed for the office, you could have a slice of pâté de la maison for breakfast instead of beef. It makes a welcome change for him. Would you like your coffee now or later? Later, said Quillerin. No, I'll take it now. And then there is the matter of his commode. What's that? His commode. You'll find it in the bathroom. It needs very little attention. He is an immaculate cat. You will find the sand for the commode in the Chinese tea chest at the foot of the bathtub. Do you take sugar or cream? Black. If the weather is not too inclement, he can take a little exercise in the patio, provided you accompany him. Normally he gets sufficient exercise by running up and down the front stairs. I leave my apartment door ajar for his comings and goings. To be on the safe side, I shall also give you a key. Is there anything I can do for you in New York? Quillerin had just experienced the first forkful of chicken livers rolled in bacon and seasoned with a touch of basil, and he rolled his eyes gratefully heavenward. In doing so, he caught the gaze of Cow Cocoon perched on the refrigerator. The cat slowly and deliberately closed one eye in an unmistakable wink.